But this is the Spirit that guides. Remember, I said guides. That guides those of us who are supposed to be guiding people to think about public policy. It's one thing for the politicians to ignore concern about and care for vulnerable people when they debate and shape public policy, but it's something very, very sad in religion when the people who are supposed to be leading religious groups treat tax cuts as more important than caring for people who don't have food, who don't have money, who need to be protected because they're strangers or in prisons. So what's the public policy implications of $1 billion of campaign spending? Well, let me ask you this question. Remember now, not one penny of that $1 billion is tax deductible. This is all given money. The same people who are complaining about paying too much taxes are giving $1 billion about wanting to reduce taxes so less money will be available for poor people to have food. That's the public policy implication. How much suffering could $1 billion relieve? How many people could get health care with $1 billion? How far would $1 billion go to help the people struggling without power and food and fuel and clean water and shelter due to Hurricane Sandy? $1 billion. They need our concern and our care, don't they? They don't need small government. They need big generosity. They need generous government, not small-minded and small-hearted government. They need help because they're vulnerable. They need the same kind of help from us that we would need if we had no power, had cold weather coming, and had the roof off the house. As we respond to their need, let's remember that they shouldn't be required to buy our compassion. You understand, whenever people are suffering, we are oftentimes told that we need to let the market take care of it. Well, guess what? The market is about selling. And suffering people shouldn't have to buy compassion. They deserve it because it's right. As a matter of fact, it is indecent. I'll just say it a different way. It is wicked to force someone who is suffering to have to buy and compete with those who have plenty for what we know they need. People who don't have roads and bridges and communities because of Hurricane Sandy shouldn't have to buy them. And they shouldn't have to beg for our help to get it. They shouldn't have to beg for clean water and warm clothes. We should be falling over ourselves, making sure they get it. They're vulnerable. Those of us who are comfortable should generously share with them out of our abundance. And we should do so without concern about being repaid. After all, when the fire department comes to your house, you hope that they are not going to leave you a bill, no matter whether you are as rich as a Walton or as broke as a homeless person. You hope they come because they really are concerned for your vulnerability. We should be concerned and compassionate because justice involves protecting vulnerable people from oppression and suffering. Jesus said so, inasmuch as you did it to the least of these, you did it to me. And because you didn't do it, you didn't do it to me. Children who are bullied and subjected to other harassment are vulnerable people. That's why our congregation is involved in this anti-bullying effort. Teachers and administrators are comfortable. The children are the ones who are vulnerable. Popular children are comfortable. The children who stick out are the ones who are vulnerable. Children who don't get picked on because they're part of the majority or because they're big or because they're strong aren't vulnerable. It's the ones who are weak and different. Teachers and administrators and popular children aren't vulnerable due to bullying and harassment, and so I was a little bit amused yesterday when I heard teachers saying, "I'm bullied." I was really amused when I heard a principal talk about being bullied. I was really amused when I heard a school superintendent talk about needing to protect himself and his reputation. I was thinking, gee, guy, how do you think the kids feel? The vulnerable children in our schools are the people who are the outsiders, not the superintendents and the administrators and the teachers and the principals. And so the vulnerable children should get our help and protection, and they shouldn't have to beg for it. They deserve it. Concern and care for vulnerable people requires courageous and faithful generosity. That's what Jesus was saying. Inasmuch as you did it, you had the courage and the generosity to do it, you did it to me. But Jesus also exposed something else. Jesus also exposed why we don't do it. Jesus said, people say we didn't do it because we didn't know it was you, Jesus. We didn't know it was you. Really, it's your fault. If you had just told us it was you, we would have done better by you. We didn't know. Don't blame us. You didn't have on your Jesus suit. You look like a kid. You look like a poor person. You look like a hungry person. You look like a homeless person. You look like a sick person. You looked like a nobody. You didn't look like the King of Glory. Jesus said, hey, whenever you see them, you see me. Because we're in the same family. That's justice. Justice is treating everyone as if he or she is the King of Glory. And saying to that person, if I see the King of Glory vulnerable, I will do whatever I can with whatever I have to help. Well, as long as we're more concerned about what's in it for me, after all, that's what's about the tax cut. Reduce my taxes. What's in it for me? I need to buy 2 or 3 more guns. What's in it for me? My profit, my comfort, my privilege, my power, my status, my convenience. We'll keep debating the same old stuff we've been talking about, and we'll keep spending more and more money because every election season we spend more money, don't we? Talking about stuff that doesn't really do any difference to the people who are vulnerable. Well, preacher, what should we be asking? If you don't like their voter guide, what voter guide would you use? I'm glad you asked. I'm going to quit. Question number 1. How will this proposed policy or candidate function concerning the people Jesus emphasized? The vulnerable people, the most vulnerable people. That's the sound that Jesus used, remember. How will this affect people who are most vulnerable? Number 2, what past experience, what does past experience reflect about this candidate's conduct and attitude about vulnerable people? You understand, if you're just now acting like you got concerned about people who are vulnerable, you're not really quite credible, because vulnerable people didn't just show up when you decided to run for office. If they were around when Jesus was there, they're around when you got here. Remember, I said this is the universal standard and the forever standard. Question number 3. What are the issues facing vulnerable people in our society that should be at the center of our debate? Vulnerable people really are not worried about buying more guns. Vulnerable people really are not worried about paying too many taxes. Vulnerable people really are not worried about the stuff that most of these folks are talking about. Question number 4, if the candidate hasn't been talking or thinking or working on these issues before now, what makes us think they'll create policies and implement practices that address them after they get elected? After all, if you can't dribble a basketball before you get on the court, what makes us think you're going to be able to play like the Globetrotters when we put you on the team? Question number 5. If we're not thinking and talking about those issues, how does that keep faith with what Jesus did and said concerning the least of these? After all, Jesus was talking to his folk. We're his folk. It's one thing for the folks who don't claim to be the followers of Jesus not to think about this, but if we're not thinking about that, what does that say about how well we're keeping faith with being the followers of Jesus and the least of these? And the last question. If people of faith don't insist that public policy and political candidates focus on the least of these, what makes us think we are saving anything in the world? The people Jesus called the least of these are everywhere. They're all around us. And Jesus said there's going to be a final exam taken. You know, every course has a final exam. The final exam is not going to be how much taxes you paid or how much you saved on your taxes. The final exam is not going to be how many guns you had or how many guns you didn't get. The final exam is not going to be how much profit we made in our business or how much we didn't make. I was hungry. I was thirsty. I was naked. I was a stranger. I was sick. I was in prison. What did you do for me? The exam hasn't changed. You and I will decide what the grade will be. Jesus made these things his priority. Let's do likewise. Amen.